Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. We have the unenviable spot after lunch, so I hope we managed to sustain your attention. The idea behind this panel, as it was sold to me, is that we were going to get two CEOs at very different stages of development. Cellulant, I'm sure you've heard of before. They're huge. Akshay Grover is the group CEO. And myself, I work at Brass. Brass is a baby compared to Cellulant. We are in Nigeria, been in Nigeria for 3 years, but here in Kenya, we are very new. We recently expanded here, and that's why I say that we're a baby compared to Cellulant. Akshay, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. We've met each other a couple of times, I think, in the context of doing business in Kenya. And I think for me, today, what made it a little special was that we have a number of our customers who are part of this event. And it just made all the sense once Caleb reached out to kind of be here. So happy to be here. And talk about our experience. And hopefully some of that is relevant for you guys.
Awesome. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself as a person?
Yeah. That's a very hard one. But and I don't know where I should start. But maybe I'll start with Africa. Set foot on the continent first. And I landed in an landed in an airport in Douala, Cameroon, in 2007-8. Those days, Cameroon's airport had tin roofs. Yeah, so when you entered the terminal, it was a tin roof. And I was like, I don't know where the hell I am, right? And I'm trying to figure this out, but fast forward 13 years, I didn't know that I was going to spend 10 of the next 13 years in Africa, building businesses across Africa. And now actually, after 10 years of working here, I finally decided to relocate to Nairobi, Kenya, which I think has probably been one of the best experiences of my life. So maybe with that, I'll just take a pause and ask you, what about you? Give us a little peek into what brought you here.
Right. So I was born in Singapore, married my Kenyan husband 10 years ago, which is what brought me here to Kenya. And I haven't looked back since. I'm actually a lawyer by training. I practiced law in litigation and commercial dispute resolution for 12 years. And then I think I got a case of itchy bums, and I needed to have a change, do something different. I always knew it would be one of two sectors, either climate change or fintech. And a friend of mine approached me, a Kenyan friend of mine approached me saying that he had an idea for a neobank. And as part of the research working with him, I approached Brass and spoke to them, and the rest is history, as they say.
For me, I think when Cellulant sort of happened my way, which is about a little over 3 years ago now, and at that time I was trying to figure out in life what I wanted to do next. I was sort of on a 6-month break, but I felt that one of the sectors why I was so bullish about fintech in Africa was one of the things I'd experienced firsthand was that it's very, very hard to build a multi-country business in Africa. And the reason it's so hard is that you underestimate what it means to be in 10, 12, 13 countries, which very often you make the mistake of comparing to, I don't know, there are people who have these nice McKinsey type charts. Oh, sorry, no offense to anybody in McKinsey, but nice charts which will say 1.3 billion people, GDP per capita, blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, actually, you can't compare India and China and population and GDP per capita to Africa, because when you want to do business here, then you got to say, am I doing business in Nigeria? Am I doing business in Egypt? Am I doing business in Kenya, in Tanzania, Uganda? And, the laws are different, the currencies are different, the people are different, culture is different, how you do business is different, what works and what doesn't work is different. And that's one of the things that is so hard to manage when you're building real businesses. And sorry, not that fintech is not real, but a real business that has infrastructure. Even a business that, for example, somebody like Bolt on food delivery and ride hailing does, yeah, is a lot more real, in my opinion, and harder to execute in Africa than fintech. And the reason is, this is digital infrastructure. So the ability to scale does not require people in every market. And that distinction is extremely important. And for me, that was the primary motivator to come and do fintech, because I felt that had a better chance of scaling. Not to say that other businesses would not, but that was my thinking 3-4 years ago.
That makes so much sense. I mean, one of the biggest things I realized when Brass expanded to Kenya, and just a bit of context, Brass is essentially a digital bank, right? It's the business bank you wish you had, or business bank account that you wish you had. Now, when we expanded from Nigeria to Kenya, the initial assumption was it's going to be plug and play. We've built the technology, we've built the software, we're just going to take that and plug and play here, right? Find a suitable partner and flick the switch. But there was so much that we didn't take into account about the different way that people think about money here, the way people interact with money here. I mean, the most obvious difference, of course, is M-Pesa. In Nigeria, our product deals purely with bank transfers. But here in Kenya, we had to incorporate M-Pesa, obviously, but there were other things like wanting to send a SDK push, an M-Pesa SDK push to your customer and collect from your customer that way. There were other things like how businesses, do they want to be registered? Are you going to be able to collect KYC from them? Some businesses don't want to be. Was that the kind of market that we wanted to serve, or were we going to operate only in the formal sector? All of these were questions that I guess we hadn't thought of when we were, contemplating the expansion. But like you say, the nuances of each different market are so different and easy to underestimate. Yeah. Can I ask you another question, Akshay? What stage of growth? I mean, like I said, I'm a baby compared to Cellulant, but you came in 3 years ago, like you said. What stage of growth did you find Cellulant at that time? And how did that affect the kind of CEO that you wanted to be, or you had to be?
I don't know if I thought about it so well, but or it was premeditated. You kind of get thrown into these situations, and then you navigate.
Adapt, yeah.
But I think the great thing about Cellulant was that it was a 20-year-old business. I mean, it's now 20 years. It was then 17 years. But there were a couple of very important things that Cellulant, the founders earlier, Ken and Bolaji, who founded the business, and the team had done. And that was building payment infrastructure. It takes, very often you want to build a 5,000 kilometer a road from one place to another. It'll take you 3 years to do that, right? Payment infrastructure in Africa, even more so earlier than today, because today you have a lot of national switches and all of that. But back then, you were integrating into every single MNO, you're integrating into every single bank. And the great thing was that this infrastructure had been built. Where I felt the opportunity lay when I stepped in was the monetization of that infrastructure. Yeah. So the infrastructure was built. It was already there was revenue in the business and all of that. But the question was, could you monetize this significantly better? And that's the journey that we really embarked upon the last 3-4 years. We said, I've got the pipes. I can debit a customer anywhere in Africa across 300 payment methods. I can credit a customer anywhere in Africa across 300 payment methods. What do I do with this infrastructure? And that's when we started going to merchants. A lot of the merchants that we have today, Emirates Airlines, Ethiopian Airlines, Bolt, Glovo, Jumia, to name a few, right? And we went and we said, we can collect for you in local currency anywhere in Africa, and we can, more often than not, settle you US dollar in a single location. And that's where we started. And then from there, we realized that one of the challenges that we have is that, or rather Africa has, is availability of US dollar. And so we started then building out our payouts business, which is exactly the reverse flow. And we said, can I get cross-border remittances into Africa, use the same infrastructure to terminate funds into Africa? And now you have a beautiful, let's call it a play between checkout and payout. And you've got dollar inflow, you've got dollar outflow, and you've got customers at the back of both of these who really appreciate that you can sit in the middle and play everything that they want you to play. So I think that that monetization journey has been the primary journey. And maybe there's a second part to it, but maybe we'll talk about it further down.
All right. And how, the second part of that question is, what kind of CEO did you have to be to find Cellulant at that point in its growth journey and take it forward in terms of people management, in terms of resource management, in terms of finances?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think sort of for me, I feel looking back in time now, and not so much that I did consciously back then, but looking back in time, I was perhaps the newest person in Cellulant, and probably at the time, if I remember right, the only non-African. So I was a bit unsure as to whether I would fit in, whether would all of this work, how much the team would embrace that, etc., etc. Very normal stuff that you think about when you're moving countries, geographies, trying to settle into a new place and all of that. But so all of that, I think, perhaps made me think about saying, how do I dimension this where I can motivate and drive a bunch of people who don't know where I'm coming from? I think that piece is the primary piece that I might have addressed. In retrospect, I feel maybe I did a bit too much of that. But, whatever. We are where we are.
Is there any such thing, too much of trying to fit in?
So I guess maybe so that I'm not the only one speaking. What about your journey as CEO? What have been sort of the opportunities, maybe the challenges that you've come across trying to set up your business in Kenya? A lot of people know your business in Nigeria. How's that journey been? What's been great? What's not been great here?
I think it's very useful having just what you've mentioned. The fact that people know about it in Nigeria has been an amazing thing for us, because people sort of already know what to expect. But when we came to Kenya, and that was early last year, it was difficult to find the correct partner, right? A partner that we could plug in with and get up and running ASAP. Every partnership that we came across required further approval from the central bank. That was likely to take quite a lot of time. And in the meantime, we were wasting resources and time being in the market, but not being able to take our product to our customers. I think that was quite challenging for us. which, you know, it's something that we sort of overcame by engaging with the central bank really often. And what surprised me there is that actually our central bank, the Kenyan central bank, is extremely open to conversation. They're extremely open to engaging with fintechs and guiding you in the right direction. I mean, they're going to, of course, emphasize the regulatory framework, but for a company like ours, who sees ourselves as a digital bank, not having a license for a digital bank was challenging, right? In order to be fully licensed, what we would have had to do is get a hodgepodge of different licenses. So perhaps a payment services provider license, perhaps a digital credit provider's license. And maybe because of my background as a lawyer, it's something that I wanted to get right from day one. It was challenging. I remember in the early days, I tried to make an analogy of being a digital agent. We have agency banking regulations. So I tried to extend that, stretch that a little bit to say, you know, what I really am is a digital agent for my partner bank. That didn't quite fly. So not having that regulatory framework was definitely a challenge. I think the other mistake that we made was not hiring our own engineering resources. So, of course, in Nigeria, we have a huge team of engineers who built the product, who service the product on a day-to-day for our 30,000 customers there. And the idea initially was borrow engineering resource from Nigeria. Now, that didn't work because there will always be that tussle, right? In Nigeria, we have tens of thousands of customers. They are paying. There is that pressure to service the people who are actually paying for our product in Nigeria. So Kenya always played second fiddle to that. And competing for those resources wasn't a good idea. It did cause delays. I think one of the things I would have done differently is to, you know, I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem, right? Engineering resources tend to be very expensive. So the idea was make enough money so that you can hire your engineering resource. Because we're quite a bootstrapping company. We don't rely hugely on foreign investment. And so, you know, there was definitely that emphasis on being a little bit more lean. But without the engineering resource, we weren't actually able to generate revenue as quick as we wanted. So I think that's something that I would do differently as well. Just hire, invest in the engineering resources from the get-go so that you can actually reach that revenue generating point sooner. Yeah. Along that line, I wanted to ask you, what advice, since we have so many students from Strathmore, we have founders, startup founders in the audience, what advice do you have for founders?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Well, I'll try and answer that question, but I'm not sure I'm the most qualified because I'm still trying to figure out all the things that I've been doing wrong for the last few months. But, you know, I think for me, there have been one or two key lessons. Number one, being a founder and raising capital. Don't over dimension your strategy based on what your investors want you to do. Think about it. Think about it, debate it, fight it if you have to. And the reason for that is that if you think about it, your shareholders and investors are driven by the market. And when there's a lot of capital, they're saying to you, go and grow. Yeah, grow hard because that's what the market wants. That's how you raise your next series B, etc., etc. And you have to ask yourself the question that am I doing this logically or am I just doing this because I'm part of the wave, right? And the reason you need to question that is that very soon you come to this beautiful turn, which is the exact converse of that outlook. And then this same group of investors is saying to you, I need profitability. yeah? And you're now going to have to do a lot of things to make that happen, right? But actually, at the very onset, when this growth story started 3 years ago or 4 years ago or whatever it is, right? Had you actually played it balanced, the probability is both your business that you're leading and your investors would already be in a superb place in an environment like this. Yeah. Of course, it's always looking back, but I just think that that's one of the key lessons I've learned over the last couple of years.
I think what I would add to that is perhaps because I don't have a background as a tech bro, I would say be vulnerable, right? Ask the questions, ask the stupid questions. I mean, initially, I was in so many discussions that talked about TAM and CAC and all this stuff that I'd never even heard of before. Ask the stupid questions. Ask, what is a TAM? What is a CAC? In fact, the way I first met Akshay is because I stalked him on LinkedIn. I was like, look, you seem to have built a business quite like Brass before. I feel like I can learn from your experience. We were partners at that time. And I'm sorry, we still are partners. Cellulant does power Brass. And so I just asked him for a meeting at his office, and I asked him a bunch of questions like, how would you deal with, customer acquisition? How do you go about doing X, Y, and Z? And, so much so that at the end of the time that we spent together, he was like, is this an interview? Are you interviewing me for a news article? What's going on here? But you have to ask the questions, because if you don't ask those questions, you're going to fumble around in the dark and not be able to leverage on people who have experience, who've done this before, who are more than happy to share that experience with you. And this was even spoken about in an earlier panel about Estonia, and how they've been able to leverage the knowledge of previous founders of unicorns to build new unicorns, right? That passing of knowledge and information is so useful. It would be a waste if we didn't leverage that. And I think that that's my big takeaway from the last 2 years. Just ask the stupid questions, be vulnerable.
And maybe just to wrap it up, and I think we're out of time, but I think maybe I'll just add one more action point to what you said, because I feel it's very relevant, is really go and find yourself one or two good mentors. Supremely important, very invaluable. Ideally, a mentor is not somebody who is in any way invested in your business, but probably has some good operating experience in the space that you operate, right? And I would say, like, find time, and if you can't find this person, then pay for this person, yeah, with the resources that you've got. But I think that's one-on-one coaching as a leader is supremely important. Yeah. So with that, I think, I don't know, we're kind of out of time.
We are out of time. I hope that was helpful. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.